listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing Bret Ridgeway. Bret is from Terre Haute, Indiana, which is not too far to the southeast of where I live, and he is an entrepreneur and the author of multiple books, including the book Mistakes Authors Make. I'm here with Bret Ridgeway, the author of several books, most notably being one of 3 authors of Mistakes Authors Make. Bret, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Well, Aaron, it is my pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you so much for having me on.
Now, feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. So I'm a 25-year veteran of both the book publishing and speaking industries. Actually got my start back in the mid-90s when I put up the first portal website in the plant engineering and maintenance market. So I was doing product fulfillment for the products I was selling to that particular niche. And I happened to at the same time have a joint venture with a guy who decided that he was going to put on his first internet marketing super conference back in 1999 in Las Vegas. And as a result of that, he called me up and asked me if I would handle the back of the room sales table for him. And honestly, Aaron, I didn't even know what back of the room sales meant at that time, but I hadn't been to Las Vegas before, so it sounded good to me, so I went out and did that. And that kind of led to a side business where I would provide the crew and, more importantly, the merchant account that could handle a large sum of money in a short period of time across multiple speakers. And so we started doing the back of the room over the course of the next 10 years at maybe 150 different events. And so I got to know a lot of the speakers and key players in the information marketing industry 20 years ago. And when they found out that I was doing product fulfillment for my own websites, one of them cornered me at an event and said, "Hey, will you do some product fulfillment for me?" Because it was a natural outgrowth of all the people I hadn't gotten to know in the industry. And so that's when I formed a company called Speaker Fulfillment Services, which provided product duplication and fulfillment services for speakers, authors, and information marketers. But because I was doing the back of the room at so many different events, I got to know a lot of speakers, and probably I've seen 2,000 different speakers in the last 20 years. And I've seen what they do well, what they don't do so well, and what authors do well and don't do so well, because I had a kind of a unique behind-the-scenes perspective from the back of the room. And so that led to basically a series of business books aimed at the author, speaker, information marketer, event promoter niche. So that's kind of what led to me where I am today, sir.
Well, I can tell the way you said the word niche that you're from Terre Haute, Indiana.
Is that telling? Yeah, I've been in Terre Haute for almost my entire adult life, and it's home. Now you're in Chicago, a few hours north of me, or thereabouts.
No, I'm from Westville, Illinois, which is a little south of Danville, Illinois. I'm actually closer to Terre Haute than Chicago.
Oh yeah, you're only an hour away.
Yeah, my mom grew up in Eugene, Indiana, which is a little north of Hugo. And Vermilion County, Indiana, that's the county north of Vigo County where Terre Haute's located.
Yeah, we go up through there quite frequently. I actually, you know where Morocco, Indiana is at?
That's further north of Hugo. That is up like in Newton County, Indiana?
Yeah, a little bit further north. Spent our memorable Christmas Eve sleeping on the floor of a Methodist church because we were snowed in there on the way back from a trip one time.
Now, without spoiling too much of your best-selling book, what is Mistakes Authors Make about?
All right, so that was an interesting project because I co-authored that with a guy named Rick Frischman, who puts on an event called Author 101 for a number of years, and with my business partner. And we had a plan in mind that we were going to launch that book, honestly, at an Author 101 live event and see if we could drive it to Amazon #1 bestseller status with the help of all the relationships I had established in the industry and Rick's relationships, etc. And that book basically highlights about 50 different areas where we see authors making critical mistakes that help hold them back from having as much success as they could possibly have. And I mean, just for an example, Aaron, I mean, one of the biggest things that authors are weak on is starting their marketing way too late. I mean, when you're coming out with a new book, you need to start building a list and getting anticipation built up for that book months and months and months or longer in advance of the actual release date of that book. And we've always been guilty of it. I mean, me too. I mean, you coming out with a new thing and it's like you're cranking so much to get it done that you don't give as much thought as you should to, all right, so how am I going to sell this book once it's actually written and published? And that's, a process that needs to run concurrently with the whole writing and getting the book done process.
Now, you mentioned a very common marketing mistake that most authors, and I'm guilty of that myself in my first book, make. But what types of mistakes are featured in mistakes authors make? Are the bulk of the mistakes featured writing mistakes, publishing mistakes, marketing mistakes, or is there a relative balance between different types of mistakes?
Well, there's a type of balance. The book has basically 5 major sections. There is a section about before you write. There's a section about the actual business of your book, because a book is a business and most people don't treat it as such, but they really should. There's a section about writing your book, a section about marketing of your book before it's written, and a section on about marketing of your book after it's written. So it is divided into areas, and there's around 10 tips roughly in each of those major sections.
Now, does the mistakes author make apply mostly to fiction authors, mostly to nonfiction authors, or is there a lot both fiction and nonfiction authors can learn?
Both can definitely learn something from the book. Now, my experience has always been in the nonfiction world, the business type book, how-to type thing. But even fiction authors have things that they should be doing marketing wise, etc., that they can pick up some definitely tips from the book that will help them out. But the major focus is nonfiction, but certainly there's a lot there that will help a fiction author also.
Now, without spoiling too much of each of your other books, what are some other books you've written?
Yeah, so the first book I wrote, Aaron, was actually based on my back of the room experience, and it was called View from the Back, 101 Tips for Event Promoters Who Want to Dramatically Increase Back of the Room Sales. And then because I was handling product fulfillment for so many of the big names in the industry, I got to see what they didn't do so well, what they did well from a information marketing standpoint. And so book number 2 was called 50 Biggest Mistakes I See Information Marketers Make. And then I co-authored a book with a friend of mine who's a much more technical guy on websites than I. So he was the main technical content source, and I was the writer and make it all flow together guy. And that was called 50 Biggest Website Mistakes Online Business Owners Make. And then following that up was the aforementioned Mistakes Authors Make title, which was followed up by a book called ABCs of Speaking that I co-authored with a couple ladies in the speaking industry. And then I do have a new book coming out in mid-2023 probably, called How to Build a Profitable Speaking Business. So all of them in the what I would call the author, speaker, info marketer, event promoter type area, the expert arena, so to speak.
Now, are all your books self-published, or all your books traditionally published, or are some of your books self-published and others traditionally published?
All the books have been published by Morgan James Publishing, and they will be publishing the new book next year. I do have one title that I did mention that I did self-publish, which is more of a booklet than a book, called Consuming Your Content, and that particular one is self-published, but all the others have been worked with a traditional publisher.
Now, in addition to being an author, you run multiple companies, and what are some of these companies and brands you've started, and what services do they provide?
Sure. So Speaker Fulfillment Services is a fulfillment company I co-founded with a guy back in 2003, and Speaker Fulfillment Services is in the midst of a rebranding under the name of Get Ship Done, because a lot of the clients aren't people that consider themselves speakers. But Get Ship Done, or Speaker Fulfillment Services as it was formerly called, is a product duplicator and a fulfillment company for speakers and authors. So for some of the clients, that means straight fulfillment services. So if they have a book that they're shipping out to customers, We integrate with their back-end system, and then that particular book is then shipped to the end customer. For other customers, they have products beyond the book, so Speaker Fulfillment Services will do the actual printing and packaging of that product, whether it's a 3-ring binder, some type of how-to manual, CDs, DVDs, USB drives. They also do a lot of what we call swag kits for people that have members that they want to recognize, or they're putting on a live event and they want to send some swag, what might be, t-shirts or journals or coffee mugs or whatever, for branding purposes. So that's what Speaker Fulfillment Service is all about. Now, there were several sub-brands established underneath that umbrella, Aaron, and those would include Disc Delivered, which is a print-on-demand service for CDs and DVDs. It includes Booklets Delivered, which is a print-on-demand for smaller booklets up to about 60 pages at the most. And then you also have Ship Your Books, which is a brand aimed specifically at authors seeking fulfillment services. And then because the fulfillment processes were developed, obviously you can run pretty much anything through that process. And so we have a number of clients who are shipping products other than books, such as supplements. So shipyoursupplements.com is a brand. And all those fall under that, what would now be known as the Get Ship Done umbrella.
Now, what do you enjoy most about the Terre Haute area?
Great question. So, there's a lot of wonderful state parks nearby Terre Haute. You don't have to go an hour in about any direction, and there's probably 6 to 8 wonderful parks. So if you're into hiking and all that, which I've done a lot of in my time, enjoy that. Obviously your weather is pretty much the same as our weather, although we do seem to avoid a lot of the snow here for some reason. It seems to go north of us or south of us. But I love the weather changes, because having the same thing year round is frankly quite boring. And I'm also I do a lot of charity work, honestly, Aaron. So and there's a lot of opportunities in this area, as there is anywhere really, I suppose. If you want to be of service to others, you have that chance to do so.
Well, Bret, you were a very wonderful guest for this podcast, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast.
Well, thank you so much, and my best wishes to you for the greatest success with your show, Aaron.
It is always wonderful to interview a fellow Midwesterner, and I strongly recommend buying Mistakes Authors Make if you're interested in becoming an author. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. I hope y'all avoid making too many mistakes doing so. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.witsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at authoraac and on Instagram at aacscribe. Copyright 2022, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.